first and opening slide, the boat, the harbour being an arrival point for many people coming by boat into the city. The proposed reclamation with just a red circle around Queen's Wharf. I sort of wonder that we spent so much time over the years talking about getting cars off Captain Cook Wharf that we're now building a reclamation to put them in a more extended position out onto Bledisloe. The next slide, just wanting to make it clear what our position is, and we've always supported, other people have said what our position is, but we've always supported just a sensible, unrushed way forward that does the study, takes into account a full cost-benefit analysis, and kept our minds open to a full range of alternatives, which we think that analysis will disclose. Our preferred option on the next page, our preferred option is to complete the Stage 2 study before finalising port precinct provisions. We do have a secondary position, and I'll just note at the bottom of that page that we support Captain Cook Wharf being included in the Central Wharf area. Reclamation and wharves having the same activity status or nearly. Wharves can be as dangerous as reclamations, it would seem to me, in terms of what we're seeing happening on our harbour today. And of course we're happy with sensible activity status for remedial works. If I go to the next page and just take this one a little bit more slowly, we support and applaud the general consensus that's developing about a view shaft off Queen's Wharf, and think that any development in the view shaft would, if you're going to have one, be a non-complying activity. The next step to have a look at in terms of interpreting this simple picture is to have a look at our existing wharves. And we propose that all the existing wharves in orange be RD. The next little thing we want to discuss is the space on the eastern side of Ferguson, which is where the dock walkway is, and we think that should be non-complying for the development of freight wharves there. I think it's sort of assumed, but at the moment in some of the plans I see it being listed as discretionary, and that is a concern. So we think that should be non-compliant. I mean, I put prohibited, but it seems to me that the most restrictive activity status that planners talk about is non-complying in these meetings.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Ferguson expansion consents. I mean, going from the Emery, I would have thought it would be contrary to the plans and conditions relating to Ferguson expansion.
It certainly is, Your Honour.
So you need at least a section 127 consent to change it. With the pedestrian walkway there, I can't see how you could berth a vessel there adjacent to the walkway.
So the suggestion with some submitters is it's non-compliant.
Well, but I think that's what Precinct Plan 4 shows in all of the different versions. Anyway, carry on. Let's keep going before we can make a point.
And then on Bledisloe, and for a reason I'll show later, a northern berth of the existing Bledisloe, a discretionary status for wharves. And then we've also said otherwise non-complying everywhere, including inside and outside the basin, except at a fallback position to say that there should be a limited area of restricted discretionary development within the basin, not the whole basin. So
just to be clear though, and this is in the legal submissions, the first starting point is non-complying until completion of Stage 2 study, and then a plan change, and then this is a fallback, so just in case that wasn't clear, it's not the preferred position, and that will be explained also in the legal submissions.
On the next slide, just quickly, some submitters and council have suggested that port development options can be left and they're fixed to the resource consent stage. That would seem a risky idea. I have entitled this presentation, Auckland is calling, if not you, who? Because I think this committee this panel is in a fantastic position, and I can see you're doing that, is deciding exactly how much control, I suppose, is in lay terms handed across to the resource consent process. That is why the study is so important. Over the page, I wonder what's behind the force and urgency for this specific expansion this expansion to expand north of Bledisloe Wharf, is it really increases in freights and longer ships? Is it that we're doing some good long-term planning? Are we just trying to negotiate the most out of the port, as some developers are around town? Is it because we've been given the drop by Tauranga and they've already got a really good deal with Katahi and Maersk? Is it a competitive response? Is it a convenient spot to put CRL spoils, as once been put on the Ports of Auckland website? Are we really, is it an owner trying to maximise the value of its asset before it's ready for sale? Or is it just a stratagem to push as far north as possible on Bledisloe before political conditions change? So I just question whether, there's lots of possible motives. Over the page, the view shaft is a view shaft of two halves. At the moment, as proposed by council, one where reclamation would be discretionary, and the other half of the view shaft where it's non-complying. And I find that a little bit anomalous in the arguments for the view shaft. The most valuable part of that view, I would contend, is actually the water space in the harbour, and that is the one that has the more permissible development regime in its path. We're not supporting the view shaft because it blocks the view, or we're not supporting the view shaft. We are supporting the view shaft because not just because of the view, but it's the expansion has such an adverse effect and disconnects the central city from the outer harbour. I think you'll find reference in the current coastal policy about connection to the harbour. So it's not, as was contended yesterday, that it's because it blocks expansion, but rather because of the adverse effect. And those adverse effects over the next page run to more than just the view. They run to the connection in two directions between the central wharves and the harbour, and also the sense of place in the centre city, the sense of place. So standing in that area developing over time as a vibrant space, Queen's Wharf, Princess Wharf, and it developing as a vibrant place in the city that has a connection to the harbour, one that's not blocked off. We question really the extent of PMA 1A. It's there, it's a licence to occupy, but it's nearly 30 years old. Ports of Auckland's position over the last 5 years has changed a lot on many things, and I don't want to dwell on those except to say there's a recent example which I think is most interesting. In a considered article in the New Zealand Herald, the chief executive said, let us do B2, B3, and I'll give you this commitment now, there'll be no further extensions into the harbour. At the time, it wasn't a thing on the spot. I'll give you no further extensions into the harbour, B2, B3. And I just find it anomalous that in these hearings we're finding a legal presentation that requests more when one thing is being said to the public, and in these rooms something else is being requested. When those things, I mean,
Mr. McEwen, and you know this. I mean, we have to deal with what comes in front of us and what goes into the plan.
Yep.
And we're not in a position to, with the way that the Resource Management Act is framed, we can only set out what's in the plan. We can't tell people what they can or can't do beyond what they might apply for.
Quite agree, Your Worship. I just thought that Mr. Gibson, when he was asked a question to follow on from that, would he therefore make reclamation prohibited beyond the extent of the B2, B3 extensions? He said not until after the Stage 2 study,
Sure.
Which I thought gave a little bit of recognition to the Stage 2 study. Over 2 slides, and I'll just talk about the 2008 plan, and I'll just talk about these very quickly, but I think the timeline that we've travelled on provides pieces of information that informs decisions where we are today. In 2008, in response to the Auckland Waterfront 2040, there's a typo there, vision, the ports had the 2008 plan, which really just involved filling in the whole lot. And in 2013, they self-scored that 0 out of 10. So a plan that was only 5 years old, filling in the whole lot, self-scored 0 out of 10. Just note in our planning processes, when we got Auckland Plan started, Auckland Unleashed, I think Auckland Unleashed made the mistake as sending out to the public for consultation a single option, which was that the ports of Auckland need to handle all the projected increase in freight. So that was what was in Auckland Unleashed and how we set out on our planning document. At the same time, a draft city centre master plan was produced, and this was the document in which the port expansion, albeit not clearly with that soft blue extension, was first noticed by people. There'd been no talk of it otherwise. And out of interest, when Waterfront Auckland when the City Centre Master Plan produced that document, Waterfront Auckland had produced a technical paper which showed an improved road improvement, which I know has been talked about here, which is a viaduct, in this case, or a tunnel between the port and Grafton Gully. Out of interest, my reasonably clear understanding, talking to Auckland Transport, is neither of those things will happen, and that the Council and AT have a preference for all trucks going up the Strand. So basically taking all of the gates at this western end and diverting them up to the Strand and having 2 lanes of trucks going up the middle of the Strand, which will obviously double the number of trucks going there, something to be explored. In 2011, the ports produced a new plan, and 2 years later they judged that to be a self-score of 5 out of 10, missing out on key criteria, harbour hydraulics, visual impact noise, and actually meeting further demand. You'll notice also in that plan there were container ships, the green ones, out on the northern berth of Bledisloe. And also at that time, the ports did a submission to the Productivity Commission saying that they were taking a conservative freight compound growth rate of 5%, and advising the Commission that most recently, or for the last 20 years, had run at 6.74. And I think that is a point I think I made in rebuttal evidence in 012, that compound growth rate was really only elevated that high because of early container uptake 20 years ago. It was a somewhat fallacious figure to be using, and we've since found out, and the ports have corrected themselves, that the figure is much lower. On the next page, our response to that plan was to produce a picture, which the response from some was that it was an exaggerated picture. That's the one below. That was the 179 metre extension viewed from Princess Wharf. Finally, and I wish they'd done it earlier, the ports have produced their own picture now of the 90 or 100 metre extension from Queens, and I would say that we didn't exaggerate much at all. The point there being that council law's decisions and other people's decisions would have been quite different had we had more accurate pictures in the front. The Auckland plan talks about having a study and to modelling a range of development of options for the ports of Auckland, and also at paragraph 765, also looking at additional port locations. That work hasn't been done. The Auckland plan also has a directive 13.7 which says provide for the long-term needs of the Port of Auckland, but I sort of think that the Auckland plan could be clearer and perhaps is a little bit muddled in so much that I know how the resolutions were passed. It's also asking for the study, and I think if people had a chance to rewrite that, it would be to do a study and then provide for the long-term needs of freight capacity for the Auckland region. I do like, though, in the directive the key words that the Port of Auckland should develop in an appropriate and environmentally sustainable manner in its urban setting. So the study was broken down into 3 parts. Stage 1 was the UNISA study, which we did in concert with our neighbouring regional and local councils. Stage 2 has not been done, but it was where each council would then break from the UNISA work and determine, using its own full plans, ours is the Auckland plan, what its infrastructure requirements might be. The port plan in 2013 was then produced, a 3rd plan within 5 years, and I suppose I thought to myself then, what if we'd run with the previous 2, because this is a 3rd plan, although a very good one, in so much that some new thinking at this stage meant that the ports had decided to defragment their container business, load it largely on Freiburg and Ferguson, freeing up much more space than had ever been available before for multi-cargo on Bledisloe. So you'll notice too that in its public consultation documents, the port itself proposed that there should be non-complying reclamation zones in the port precinct. We adopted the port in late August 2013. In early 2013, the Mayor said that there should be no expansion, and extensions are a form of expansion, until we had done the robust long-term study including economic, social, environmental factors. So that's what the Mayor said in the early August 2013. Later in the month, after 2 or 3 weeks deliberation, the councillors voted for a non-complying status, and you can see the resolution there, APC 2013-70, a non-complying status until the stage 2 port study had been done. And we know that it's just being announced and considered tomorrow, so according to that resolution we still should have a non-complying status. And from the discussions I'm hearing around the issues around non-complying, it makes sense to have that, to get the cost-benefit analysis that we're all testing our minds about. On the next page, the NZIR report has been touted as the Stage 2 study. It's not the Stage 2 study. It is a shorter term, narrowly focused study that looks at port and port-only requirements. A disappointing study in so much that we already had so much information from the Price Waterhouse report, but it failed to provide any significant new quantitative data about multi-cargo berths and the backup areas. So there's different types of multi-cargo down there: cars, cement, bulk freight. What are the berth and area requirements for each of those? If you're going to be paid to do a study and multi-cargo is where the pressure point is, then start examining that and report some value add back. What the report did is it went as far as comparing the ratio of backup studies, backup space and area at the berth in Tauranga Northport, which is completely irrelevant to the study. So NZIR, the draft RFP asked for international comparisons. I've provided one there of the vehicle terminal at Southampton, a 4-storey building with processes 67,000 vehicles a day through a footprint of 1.5 or half an acre. Sorry, 67,000 vehicles per acre per year. Sorry, and just to provide you with a little comparison, down on the port there's that Toyota building on B1. It's 0.7 hectares. So if you were actually to use that sort of ratio on that size building at 4 stories, put in the appropriate space, you'll do 115,000 cars, which is more than half our current quota. Another little quick calculation. I don't really want to be held to task over it, but it's an interesting question, and why hasn't someone answered it? If we're doing 220,000 cars a year, and ships drop off 2,500 a time, and they can unload 160 cars per hour, and from Bledisloe we sort of currently average 184, so I've used a conservative number, and we say a ship takes 3 hours to berth and 3 hours to disembark, and I've just watched one come in an hour, so my numbers are generous. We can very, very quickly do a sum. How much berth space does roll on, roll off take to do 220,000 cars. Now, I'm not a port expert, but I'm saying the NZIR report could have produced numbers like that in international comparisons. And councillors and others have touted or held out the NZIR report to be something that proved a point about the port's need to explain. Far from it.
Wouldn't you also have to take into account when the vessels are scheduled to arrive and depart?
Yes, you would have to take that into account. My understanding of the roll-on, roll-off business is that the car vessels don't work to as tight a schedules as the container vessels, and I think that's a question to ask of the port. Over 2 slides. I talked about the Port Plan 2015, and that is one the ports haven't really announced. That other 3 were all different port plans, but things are so different now that I'm saying that almost the plan is different now, because back in 2013, when that plan was consulted to the public, it said at the top in the box, there is no need to decide on either option right now. This is what the port said, no need to decide on either option. There's a sense of there's not a rush, we're just doing a plan. But the next year in 2014, they lodged, as we all know now, expansion consent applications. So in 2013, talking to the public, there was no rush. In 2014, they lodged the consent applications. And all of a sudden, and I think it's a different plan, because the plan isn't just about the physicality of the port, but its timing and its use. And now everything's urgent. Now cruise ships won't fit. Now we have to use Bledisloe for large container ship overflow, so the use is changing. And it's sort of a different plan than 2013. The Council, City Centre Integration Group, have a Central Wharf strategy. It was put before the committee 2 months ago in February. Despite asking councillors not to think about what should happen on Bledisloe Wharf, the document that the CCI produced, and the CCI is remember, a collection of all the council CCOs. The port attends those meetings and is a member both at a chief executive and operational level. And it said there that the ports of Auckland wharf structures and reclamation will be required to replace loss of port and operational area. So my point here being that council has said that it doesn't have a position on exactly what sort of reclamation is required, and yet a paper was processed through council that said will be required. You can see there that there's an intention and a preferred position by council or by the CCI. It's going out for further study to lengthen Captain Cook to put long cruise ships either side. And I think there's an interesting thing that we might consider here, and that is to say, if this is a plan which clearly the officers are endorsing, then the next question to ask about this plan is in what sequence should the new developments, if any, be implemented? And I think that would be an interesting thing. Is it more sensible to rush out and do B2 and B3 and consequentially the reclamation between, or follow on, or is it more sensible to do the cruise ship first? Let's go to 2 pages and say that the Stage 2 study is announced and underway, cost-benefit analysis being an important consideration, and over again, just in the interest of time, to the picture of Tauranga. And I've mentioned in my rebuttal evidence some facts about Northport, I only put this in here to remind myself that there have been a few things said wrongly about the capacity of Tauranga. I'm not going to speak today about them, but there have been a few things said wrongly about the capacity of Tauranga, and what types of freight can pass by rail up and down the lines to Tauranga and so forth. So I just do put that picture there, though, to show you what the capacity of the Tauranga terminal is.
Can you just tell me what a key is?
So, I can't read it myself, but the red land is land that is currently developed and being used as a port. The yellow space is land that's available for future development. So you can see that on Sulphur Point, there's a big yellow block there, berth side, It does have one public road running to it, but there's a large amount of space there, quayside, available for future development, and that adds up to that's a container operation, to more space than the ports have altogether. A picture on the next slide about how intensified container operations look, and I do like the saying a compact city, a compact port and a compact city. If we're going to be more compact about the way we operate our port, eventually we're going to have to go up more. That's something that would test our minds as well, because I think the visual effects of the port will become quite different as we actually intensify. And I heard a number yesterday that was a number of the order of 4 million, I think, mentioned. 2 million is something we all can see could be done on Ferguson. 3 million and 4 million are now numbers that are being mentioned. It would be quite a different environment than it is now if that was being done. Trucks on the Strand, I can confirm to you that the levels of nitrogen dioxide, toxic nitrogen dioxide in the Strand are very high. Those results will be released shortly. If and when the AT implement a plan to put all its trucks through the Strand rather than down Beach Road, I can only imagine that the NO2 levels will increase. In RPS 012, I provided some evidence, which has been uncontested, that a truck congests roads between 1.5 and 4, the 4 being in slow-moving environments, which they are down in our city centre. A truck causes 4 times the congestion of a car at least, and that seemed to be a point lost on other transport experts. Trains on the Eastern Line, freight trains, do pose a problem eventually, not today. Price Waterhouse mentioned conflicts between freight and PT, but did not examine them in depth. We're talking about a $4 billion investment in the CRL and other train investments. It's a huge investment for Auckland, and we'll only realise the benefits of that if we have development around the Eastern Line, around the Western Line and so forth. And I just sort of mentioned there that the freight development along that line will eventually, as the PT development too, will impose costs on that development around that line. How good can Panmure be? At the moment there's just a small project, which is at Iraqi, which is making that tunnel there to carry hazard goods through it at Iraqi. That's got a cost blowout of $30, $40, $50 million, just because we're carrying hazard goods up that line. Further up at Southdown, where we're looking at triple tracking as fast as we can, it's my understanding, between Southdown and Wiri. If we triple track that line for freight, I know that the track designers now is testing their minds how a freight train carrying 100 containers is going to cross the 2 tracks. That damn decent money is going to have to be spent out there. So there's things that I would just suggest that the panel needs to avail itself of in terms of looking at the cost, and that would come out of a proper study. The cost of rail development up that line clearly will not be zero as claimed. I just note here that the Grafton Gully funding is still in the Integrated Transport Program, quite specifically listed as $3 signs. So there's no specific figure attached to it, but it's something that's in the ITP. The next slide I'd just like to take a little bit more time over. I find it unusual that in a debate that's talking about ship length, that we've got this far and no one has actually presented to you as a piece of evidence what the lengths of the berths are and what the typical lengths of ships are. I think it's quite an interesting thing to look at, because it goes to the understanding what the responses to the current capacity issues are. Marsden Wharf is made of 2 parts, a reclaimed part plus a paired part. If you look out the window today, you'll see the deck on the paired part being taken off. My understanding is that the Ports of Auckland don't intend to take the piles out for several years yet. If we took the deck off and the piles out quite quickly and got on with that job, the available berth space on Bledisloe would move from 280 metres to 485 metres. So rather than prioritising the Waitemata grab, we could prioritise, if the problems are short term, we could prioritise the removal of the deck and the piles on Marsden, and we end up with a 485 metre ship length. Now, the Queen Mary 2 and the Ovation of the Seas and the Ovation of whatever the next one coming next are 348 metres, and it will fit there with space to spare. There is a contest of argument going on about what the cost of removing the rest of Marsden is, but I'm happy to leave that up to a study. I note that the Captain Cook Wharf, currently at 348. There are wharfs around the world that berth the Queen Mary at 348. Jellicoe at 334 berths the Queen Mary now. Jellicoe is being used obviously for the Wholesome cement ships, but I would argue that the Wholesome cement ships, I don't know the exact cycle, won't be berthed there all the time, because they will be actually going to get some cement from Indonesia and also taking some down to Timaru. I think one of the things we need to look at really is a limitation possibly on the port because of its design. Ferguson Wharf is now extended to the max. I think the port site actually says 629 metres. We've said 608 in our first study here, but you can see there that container ships, the new breed, the next breed up at 310, so you might be squashed to get 2 of those in, and that's the sort of problem we have with Auckland being a constrained site. We go further over, we flip 2 or 3 over now and get to Teal Park, and I've gone quite quickly, and I hope the pace is okay, Your Honour. But I'll just move to Teal Park very quickly and talk a little bit more. No, I won't talk more slowly. Teal Park is an important eastern bookend for waterfront Auckland. I think it's for the city centre master plan a gateway to the city. I think it deserves, and I'd like the panel to consider it having a sub-precinct of its own on the basis that it should be developed in the long term as something which is not an active freight port. It's quite different, and it performs an important function for Auckland. So I've got some references there to waterfront Auckland documents. I've actually run over further to a picture with the helipad on it, the current uses and points of interest. So I've moved ahead a little bit there, I think. Helipad, marine, Teal Park, 400 metre boatway, heritage values for Mali, and of course Teal Airways. I think it's a place that might be suitable for small scale buildings as part of an entranceway. You can see there it's a place where friends meet. I can see a picture there of Mike Lee and the Honourable John Banks. At the community reference group meeting, in a recent community reference group meeting, a question was raised as to supports. Do you think the walkway is a good idea? The ports responded, yes, we think it's a good idea and it should be extended. So I just go back to my earlier comment to say that we need some protection there. So Area A, not quite up with the latest on building areas, but in the latest track changes. But I think there's a beautiful green space down there that the cyclist is in the bottom picture just cycling past, which I'm calling the Sunderland Mound. And I think it would be a great shame to lose that green mound. I think it complements Teal Park. And with those 2 green spaces and the walkway, we've got something that starts to define a precinct, particularly since it's got different uses within it. I'm going over a couple of pages. I think I'll flick past all those, and I'll come back to the review possible development outcomes slide. So I've gone past my, and this one here, I don't know if I'm seeing something different than others, but in the slide which I think Mr. Kirk has produced, I'm seeing down that side on the east of Ferguson something which is discretionary for wharf development, which I don't think is the intention, or it should be. And then over on the western side of Ferguson, I'm seeing something that's discretionary for reclamation. So looking at that, putting those two together, it would look to me like someone could implement a plan to with these provisions as proposed, to reclaim to the east of Ferguson and put containers out to the to the west of Ferguson and put containers out to the east. So all I'm saying there is we have to think carefully about what these colourful diagrams mean in terms of the projects they could deliver. Just on the next slide, and I'll just take one more minute before I pass over to David. Extending Bledisloe to the north is constrained by views, connections, sense of place argument. And the 2008 self-score of 0 out of 10 says filling it all in doesn't work either. And the 5 out of 10 2011 fill a big part of it in, self-score 5 out of 10, that doesn't work either. So those 2 points in combination would seem to suggest that the mouth of the basin should largely remain open. And that goes to what I think the ports have said over time: we need the berth space. So expanding to the south is not an option. They've nibbled away at Key Street once before. And I think the answer here is that we're really looking at a port that is at, if not nearing, the end of its expanding life. And that is the reality. And I'm not talking about a port that's at the end of its economic life, but I think that the reality and the facts are that they're at the end of their expanding life. The port has been hell-bent on extending Bledisloe. All options it's ever delivered extend Bledisloe. And I think we've come to a point now, because of the adverse effects of that, is to ask the port, or otherwise get an independent experts to say, what can you do inside the basin? And I go back over a couple of slides to where I began, and just further on, and that is the backup heart of the city position would be that perhaps there is an area within the basin, not the whole basin, that could be RD. And I say that, and I don't want to talk about micromanaging the port, but certainly I think RD in the whole basin, given all the evidence and that we've been told and plans we've been shown, doesn't make sense. And since we've spent so much time talking about the shape of what a reclamation could be outside the basin on Bledisloe, it should seem to me a fair question that we could spend some time on what part of inside the basin could be RD, if it needed to be, post the stage 2 study. Gone as fast as I could.